So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Legacy Learning Series, an online monthly learning series featuring legacy faculty members in honor of Pardes' 50th anniversary celebration. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we introduce our lecturer for today. Please keep yourselves muted throughout the lecture. Questions will be asked at a couple of points throughout the class, and you'll be able to respond in the chat. The source sheet was sent out in an email, and I'm going to be dropping the link in the chat. Please note that we will not be sharing our screen with the source sheet, so Judy can share her PowerPoint presentation. So we suggest that you either pull it up on your screen side by side with the Zoom room or print it out and have it in front of you. And lastly, we've done a few of these Legacy Learning Series classes before, and we decided that it would be a nice opportunity to keep the Zoom room open for a few minutes after the class, so that former students of Judy's or anybody really who wants to say hello can unmute themselves and informally for just a few minutes say hi. So with that, we have the joy of learning today with Pardes faculty, legacy faculty member Judy Klitsner on the tent, the field, and the battlefield, how stories of biblical women mine and undermine each other. Judy has been teaching at Pardes for more than 30 years and is still going strong. She reaps enormous nachat from her current students, as well as from the many wonderful alumni she has had the privilege to teach. Judy lectures internationally and is the author of award-winning book, Subversive Sequels in the Bible, which she will be telling us more about today. She is the founding board chair of Sacred Spaces, an organization that seeks to prevent abuse in Jewish institutions. So with that, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, and I'll turn it over to you, Judy.
Thanks so much, Jordan, and it's great to see so many wonderful faces, familiar faces here. Just a secret, that bio was written about 5 minutes before I went on this evening. That was special for this group, telling you how much nachas I get out of my teaching at Pardes, and that remains true and gets truer all the time. Anyway, so it's a great pleasure to be here. You did mention, Jordan, that people are going to be muted, and I apologize for that piece of this. Ideally, we would be having a wonderful interactive experience. However, due to time constraints and my severe technological limitations, we're not going to be doing that. But we will have a couple of times where I'll pause and ask a question and ask everybody to just write very briefly. If you have something to say, put something in the chat, and Jordan will be good enough to read it out loud. And then if there are some, at the end, we'll leave a few minutes for actual questions that you feel free to pose. Okay, so I mentioned in my little bio there, this book that I wrote. And that you would be hearing more about it. And that's because what we're going to be doing today is talking about something that in this book takes up a full half of the material. And that is a consideration on the question of the nature of biblical women. Okay, I've just said quite a lot. And in approaching the question of biblical woman, the technique that I talk about and that I illustrate in this book is very, very helpful. That is the subversive sequel. Basically, I have long subscribed to the notion that the Bible contains within a vibrant conversation. Stories are in a kind of dialogue with one another all the time. And how do we know that stories are conversing with one another? They share each other's language. They share each other's themes. These are texts that are talking to one another. And the subtitle in this book that I wrote is How Biblical Stories Mine and Undermine Each Other. Stories are cross-referencing each other by borrowing each other's language and each other's themes, sometimes to mine each other, meaning that one story will elucidate, expand, interpret the other. That's why it's echoing it. That's why it's creating this parallel. And when things get even more intriguing is that sometimes one story will borrow language from another to chip away at its assumptions and sometimes even radically overturn its conclusions. That's the undermining part. And what I found so, first of all, just so intriguing about this and so helpful about this is that the theory basically looks at Tanakh as a dynamic work where a story, even though when you think you've ended it, it isn't quite finished. If you follow the trail of the language and of the themes, you'll find that another story at some other point will pick up that story and play it out, questioning its assumptions and often radically overturning its conclusions, playing out in a completely different way. So that this is a kind of consideration and reconsideration of themes and conclusions that we've reached. A story is always open, always moving. What better technique to study the very, very complex question of biblical women? And if I could just say something personal for a moment, maybe I'm working out some of my unfinished business from my Beit Yaakov education. But when I went to this wonderfully religious high school, the messages that I got were loud and clear. There was always this attempt to characterize what is the essential biblical woman, to limit, define, generalize. Here she is. The question that was asked repeatedly, what is she? What is this woman? The assumption was that there was something monolithic, and not only that, but that the portrait was quite prescriptive. If biblical woman, meaning mostly the matriarchs, are A, B, C, and D, so should you, good Jewish girl, be that same A, B, C, and D. And that always was very conveniently similar to the general messages of modesty and staying out of the spotlight that I was getting in the rest of my education. Only years later, I realized that there was something that was deeper than this that was bothering me about this question, even the search for a definition of biblical woman. And that was the question itself kind of presupposed the notion that women were outside of the norm. That the primary human beings are the men. They act as the observers, as in a sense, almost the diagnosticians. They're putting this creature called woman under a microscope and trying to figure out what is it? How do we define it? How do we understand it? There's the us, we are the insiders, and they are the them who are on the outside, and we have to try to somehow control and understand it. Years later, when I started studying Sigmund Freud, a little psychology, I was actually quite shocked to find how persistent this attitude has been. Here is the father of psychoanalysis famously asking this, the great question that has never been answered and which I have not yet been able to answer despite my 30 years of research into the feminine soul is, what does a woman want? Right? Again, he's got his lab coat on, the microscope out. How do I get on top of this? What is this thing? How do I characterize it? How do I label it? And this question refuses to die. It's still alive and well, certainly in the Jewish world. In some sense, here in Israel, it's getting a little more prevalent all the time. Anyway, but what I want to point out through our textual journey, and it's quite a long and involved textual journey, is that the Bible itself rejects this kind of question and this kind of simple classification. The vibrant conversation is going to reveal the story of women as much broader, much more dynamic, and significantly most more integral to the story of humanity itself. Okay, so that's all preface. We're going to start with the women of the book of Genesis, and just to talk a little bit about them before we actually really dive in, is to acknowledge that to some degree they meet the stereotype that we have when we first meet them. They are focused almost exclusively, all four of the matriarchs in the book of Genesis are focused almost exclusively on motherhood, to the extent that some of them are going to claim that their lives have no purpose without children. We'll get to that soon. All four matriarchs, we note, are at least at some point infertile. And what we find in the book of Bereshit also is that the only antidote to infertility is God's direct intervention, right? There's no subtlety about this. God is opening wombs, God is closing wombs. And the only conduit to God, right, sadly, are the patriarchs. But they are not always attentive to their wives. So here we have women who have no access to God, needing the patriarch to intercede on their behalf, and the patriarchs are at various stages failing to do that. So we've got women who are marginalized in many different ways. Another thing that we need to notice about the women in the book of Bereshit is, and here's a nice little picture of a tent, that's where they live. That is their natural habitat. Often what we see is that they are in the recesses of the tent while the men are the faces to the world. They are sometimes manipulating things because they don't have the power. They're manipulating things behind the scenes. Here's this little piece from a wonderful movie called My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which could easily have been called My Big Fat Jewish Wedding, where this woman gives her wisdom. She says, the man is the head of the house, but the woman is the neck. Right? She makes the head move this way or that way. Okay, she meant it in a way that women actually have the power. I think what we see in the book of Bereshit is that the women actually don't have the power, and that's why they are left with nothing more than to try to stand in the background and make things happen. Okay. However, as we look more closely in the book of Bereshit, we're going to find that there are glimmers of other possibilities. And once we notice that, we're going to look at a series of women in Bereshit, and then we're going to go out of the book of Bereshit into a radically subversive conversation in the book of Judges, which is basically going to take all the assumptions that we thought we could rely on, throw them up into the air, and turn them upside down. Okay, so here we go. First, the bad news. And it's going to be, you should prepare yourselves. There's going to be quite a bit of it. We start with Abraham and Lech Lecha. And I want to just go through a very familiar text with you with a slightly different emphasis. Here is God speaking to Abraham for the first time. Vayomer Hashem el Avram, Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeit. What are you hearing? Ha, ha, ha. Second person, masculine, singular. God is speaking only to Abraham. I want you to go. I will make you a great nation. You will be for a blessing, blessing, blessing. There is not a hint here of his partner. Where is Sarai, right? Sarah, who is at that point still called Sarai. Where is she in this promise? She's nowhere to be found, even though she does go with Abraham. Is she part of the covenant? We don't know. And if we notice this conversation, the other side of the conversation, Abraham speaking back to God, you see that this is a very exclusive conversation being conducted between God and Abraham, where Abraham notices after a while that he's not having the promised child, and he says to God, "Mati tein li va'anochi holech haribi." What will you give me? I am childless. Right? God is promising at the center of the promise of the covenant is progeny, is land. And Abraham is saying, where is that progeny? Mine, my personal, doesn't say a word about his wife. And the promise that God gives, God assures him, don't worry, you will have someone who comes out of your mime'echa, from your own loins, will be your heir. Your loins, where is Sarah? Okay, the first time we actually, so where is Sarah? What we know about her at this point is one thing, and I would imagine reading this verse with kind of dark chords in the background. Vatihi Sarai akara ein lavalad. She's barren. She has no child. Right? She's kind of doubly excluded as a woman in this story, and as an infertile woman. What are her possibilities here? And I think her possibilities, at least in the beginning, are quite bleak. She's unable to conceive, and in her desperation, she offers a situation of surrogacy to her husband. She offers up the Egyptian maid Hagar, and with these very, very resonant words, she says to Abraham, God has prevented me from having a child. Bo na el shifchati, consort now with my maid. Ulai ibane mimena, perhaps I will be built up from her. And I think this word ibane is a wonderful word on two levels. First of all, it contains the word ben. I will be, in a sense, sunned through her. I just made up a verb. But ibane, the root of that is the root bet nun he, build. We've come across that word one time so far in the biblical text, in the book of Genesis. in regard to a biblical woman, and that is, of course, when the first woman was created from the side of the man, vayivet, right? God built the rib and created woman from it. So what I think, if we can read into Sarai's desperate cry, ulai ibanem imena, we get a sense that without children, she feels that construction, that created woman, is now in danger of collapse. Without a child, I have no substance. I won't exist. And I think that what we have here is really a sense of despair on her part. And I want to just move on now to say that despite the bleak situation, what we see gradually and in very subtle ways is that both God and the narrative voice of the text start a kind of pushback to the norms that we have encountered. Here is God offering the brit, the covenant, to Abraham in chapter 17. And here, for the first time, God now says, I think I need to be explicit about this. God says, Uverachti ota, I will bless her, Sarah. V'gam natati mimena lecha ben. I have given you a son from her. That's the mother of the child that I've been promising you. But here, shockingly, what is Abraham's response? Vayipol Abraham al panav vayitzchak. He fell on his face and he laughed, and he said these really, really troubling words, Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha. If only Yishmael would live before you. Yishmael is, of course, the son that he already has, the son who was born from Hagar. And here, Abraham, where God is making him this amazing promise that at the age of, he will be 100, Sarah will be 90. You can have this miracle child. And his response is basically, you know what, God, you don't have to make me any kinds of these outlandish promises. I'm okay. I actually have a son. And we might, by extension, conclude that what he's saying is Sarah is not essential to this covenant. I'm already covered. God then says, listen, Abraham, you're not hearing me. Vayomer Elohim, aval Sarah ishtecha yoledet lecha ben. Let me read my lips, basically. Let me be explicit. Sarah is going to be the mother of this great nation. That message, curiously, is not communicated to Sarah. She does not know that she is going to become pregnant with this miraculous pregnancy. And now we get to the very next chapter, when God now escalates the efforts and sends 3 divine messengers to the tent of Abraham and Sarah. And here I think what we find is yet another subtle message that things need to change. Vayera elav Hashem be'elone mamre. Okay, here is patriarchal behavior. God appears to the patriarch. Where is the patriarch? He is petach ha'ohel. He's at the entrance to the tent. He is the face to the outside world, greeting people as they come. He raises his eyes. He sees 3 men. And what does he do? He launches into this flurry of activity to take care of them. He is the responsible manager of the household. He's the man. He hurries, and these Hebrew words that are used repeatedly, maher, roots, rats, he's running, he's scurrying, he's hurrying to take care of their needs. He is the man in charge. Where is Sarah? At one point, he rushes to the tent, ha'ohela, right? That is her space. And he says, come on, woman, knead, make those cakes, right? And then he runs to the cattle, etc. Okay, so far, each one has got his or her own space. And suddenly, though, somebody steps up and says something that kind of shakes up their assumptions. Here, these men turn to Abraham and they say these 3 words. I hope you can see it in freakishly large letters on your screen. Aye Sarah ishtecha. Now, on the surface, what do these words mean? Where is Sarah, your wife? Where is she? However, our tip-off that this is not an innocent question, is that the word aye is used, where there's a much simpler word that is used in Hebrew when somebody wants to know the location of something else. And I know you're all saying it with me. That word is epho, where, right? To this very day, and here's a tip, if you're in Jerusalem and you want to find the grocery store, do not stop a person and say, aye hamakolet, right? Don't do that. Efo, that's the word that we use when we're looking for the location of something. But here the word aye is used. And what I learned from my teacher of blessed memory, Nechama Leibovitz, is that the word aye introduces a rhetorical question. Why is something not where it's supposed to be? Ayeka, God says to Adam when he's hiding after eating from the forbidden fruit. E hevelachicha, where is Abel your brother, says God to Cain after he's killed him. Basically, God is calling out to people. What have you done? What's going on? I'm calling you out. Aye Sarah ishtecha, and here is Rashbam in the 12th century agreeing with this reading. He says, where is Sarah your wife? Even though they knew, they asked. It's rhetorical, as did God, who said to Adam, Ayeka. Basically, what they're saying to Abraham is not, where is Sarah your wife? It's a demand. Where is Sarah your wife? Why isn't she here? She should be by your side, receiving this divine message, being an integral part of this covenantal experience. What we might even imagine that a registering shock that Sarah doesn't even know. He hasn't even communicated any of this to her. She, of course, is left to overhear this at the doorway to the tent. She's eavesdropping, right, straining to hear it. And so what we've got here, again, as we saw in chapter 18, is a kind of effort by God, first God directly here through messengers, to try to move the conversation to be more inclusive of Sarah. And in both cases, we have a kind of resistance on the part of Abraham. What about Sarah? And here I think is the saddest part of all. We get a slight insight into her feeling about what's going on. Here in the last two lines, the Avraham v'Sarah zikenim ba'im bayamim, they're both old. Chadal lihiyot l'Sarah orach kanashim. Sarah had ceased to have the ways of women, the paths of women, which is a kind of euphemism for her menstrual period. She's long past menopause. But chadal orach, I look at this as a kind of code for her paths have been cut off. If she can't have children, her life's path is blocked. I want you to remember these two words. I want you to remember these two words because they appear in the entire Tanakh only twice. And I promise, if I talk really quickly, that by the end of this shiur, we're going to get to the second time in a radical rereading of everything we're seeing here. What else can we infer about her feeling? She laughs bikirba within herself. Maybe as Rashi says, she's laughing at herself, at her insides, where she's saying, I'm worn, I'm withered. There is nothing good left for me to do in the world if I can't have a child. That is the only avenue open to me. Okay, so as we move out of Sarah's story, we're left with a sense of a kind of tragic tent-dwelling matriarch living deeply in the recesses of the tent, feeling a kind of futility without children. She can't reach God directly. Her husband, Abraham, is called a prophet, a navi, but ironically, sadly, he never prays on her behalf. He does pray on behalf of other infertile women in Gerar, but that's a discussion for another time. In any case, we need to move on to the next matriarch, who is going to take some of these tropes and show us glimmers of unexpected possibility. Here is Rebecca. And when we meet her, she is outside. She is out at the well. And Abraham's servant, who's in search of a wife for Isaac, finds her drawing water. And he says to her, Hashkini na ma'at mayim mikadech. Can I have a little bit of water? And she surprises him by feeding him lots and lots of water, running back and forth. And tell me if these words have any resonance for us this evening, or daytime, whatever you've got there. Vatimaher, vatimaher, vatarotz. She's hurrying, she's scurrying to draw water, to draw again and again and again to make sure that not only is he full, but all of his camels. She is the Abraham figure here. She is the manager. in this situation. She is playing the role of the person who is the face to the outside world, who is taking care of the needs of weary passersby. She is the person in charge. As we read on in her story, we find that she's the Abraham figure in other surprising ways, echoing the lech lecha, right? Go, the first word that God says to Abraham. And here, Rebecca, as the only one of the matriarchs who's actually asked what she wants to do, says this incredibly resonant word, elech, I will go. She doesn't even have the benefit of a godly visitation. And on her own, she decides at her own initiative, I'm going to that place. And that place, significantly, is the same precise geographical trajectory that was crossed by her father, her future father-in-law Abraham, from up here in Haran down into the land of Canaan. So she basically follows the same path, fearlessly leaving everything behind to go to this place where she hopes to find God. Right? She is the Abraham figure. And in case the point wasn't strong enough, we notice that the blessing that Rebecca's family gives her is almost identical to the blessing that Abraham receives after the Akedah. Her family blesses her, and they say, "Oh, sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes." And here is God to Abraham: I will surely bless you, make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the heaven, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. Almost word for word, she is the Abraham figure. Until she meets the actual patriarch, and then something shifts. And here, I want to try this little experiment. I want to ask you all to take 3 minutes, not more. Read this passage on the page, either on the sources that you have at home or on the screen, in whatever language works best for you. How would we characterize Rivka in this passage? That's all. Okay? Just a couple of adjectives to describe Rebecca in this passage. Okay, over to you. Please put it in the chat, just a couple of words, and if you can base it on information that you see here, that's what I'm looking for.
I'll just read them as they get posted. We have humbled, starstruck.
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
Passive verbs describe her actions, so she is passive, maybe even reserved.
Okay.
Takes on role.
Yes. What was the second one? Humbled?
And starstruck was the second one.
Okay, starstruck. I want to pick up on that. I love that. Why is she falling off of her camel? She sees this man, and that's the first thing that happens. And I think that's a reasonable assumption, is that she's starstruck and she can't keep her balance. I would add to that the irony, and here this is a quick advertisement for studying texts again and again and again. There's a great rabbinic statement that you can't compare learning something 100 times to learning it 101 times. The 101st time that I looked at this text, I said, oh my goodness, what is she falling off? A camel, of all things, right? She is the woman who is in charge of the camels. She's the camel lady, right? She's the one who's bringing water and making sure they could get everything they need. And here she can't keep her balance on a camel, right? Something has happened to her. Humbled. She's starstruck. What else?
We have takes on role once had by Sarah.
Okay. Okay, where do we see that? We see that in the fact that at the end of, but we'll get, you know what, before we get to that, let's just look at one more. She takes this scarf and covers herself. That is quite a significant move. There's one other woman in the book of Genesis who does that, and that is Tamar, when she's hiding her identity. And here we get the sense that she is quite literally self-effacing. She's covering herself. And then Yitzchak, who is now, right, classic patriarch, escorts her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. Okay, earlier today I mentioned Dr. Freud. I think he'd have a field day with this one, but that's the mother part. But the tent part, where he's basically communicating to Rivka, this is where you live now. You've been out there up until now, but now I'm here. I am the patriarch, and you are now going to a much more traditional matriarchal space. And in fact, what we're going to see as we read on, why isn't that moving? Is that Rebecca, and I'd like to connect this with Sarah's statement, Ulai ibaneh mimena, this sense of being unformed, unwhole, without children. She utters these two very dramatic, kind of existential, angst-filled cries. Lama, if I don't have, when the twins, when she finally becomes pregnant and she's got these twins who are moving around within her, she says, if this is the case, why do I exist? Later she says, what good is my life? She questions her very existence. And if we are to move ahead to the next matriarch, Rachel, we find that she's going to make the most dramatic statement of all, the most explicit. Where look at this. Vatera Rachel, she sees that she could not bear a child to Jacob, and she said, give me children, if not, I shall die. Nothing less than that. Without children, I have no life. Interestingly, Jacob's response is anger. And here is an interesting take on her statement and on Jacob's anger. This is a piece of commentary that is absolutely remarkable because it came out of the 15th century from a commentator by the name of Isaac Arama, known as Akedat Yitzchak. And he says this, the two names, Isha and Chava, he talks about the first creation of woman in the Garden of Eden. Woman, he says, has two different names, two different purposes. One is Isha. The first teaches that woman was taken from man, emphasizing that like him, right, Isha is taken from Ish. So just like the man, she was capable of understanding and advancing intellectually and morally, right? Everything that he's capable of, she is capable of. The second alludes to the power of childbearing and rearing children, as is indicated by the name Chava, the mother of all the living. A woman deprived of the power of childbearing will be deprived of the secondary purpose and be left with the ability to do evil or good, just like the man who is sterile. Jacob was therefore angry with Rachel when she said, give me children, or if not, I shall die. By exhibiting anger, he sought to reprimand her and make her understand this all-important principle. Her childlessness did not render her a dead person as far as the joint purpose in life was concerned, just the same as it would be had he been childless, right? As I said, truly remarkable. As we will see a little bit later, I'm going to argue that there are actually three different names and three different characters, women characters in the original creation story, but he says something truly revolutionary here about woman, her primary purpose being be a person. And so what I want to say now, I want to use this as a kind of springboard, jumping off point out of the book of Genesis, where many of the assumptions that we thought actually are played out, right? Again, along with glimmers of other possibilities. But what we're going to find now in this radical book of Judges, this subversive book that we're about to encounter, is that the prevailing attitude of that's represented by Rachel is repudiated in that book, and Jacob, or that at least which is ascribed to Jacob, his view that women are all capable, that is going to win the narrative. Okay, so without any greater delay, we're going to get to the book of Judges. Here we are. Our next pair, Deborah and Yael. And here we find, when we first meet her, that Devorah is no ordinary biblical woman. Look at this. Udivora isha neviah. First thing, she's a prophet, right? In the book of Genesis, only the men were prophets. Abraham was a prophet. Women were reliant on the prophet, on the male prophet, to reach God for them. Here, the woman is the prophet, and she is the one who conveys God's word to the men in the story. In this case, Barak. We'll get to him in a moment. She is called Eshet Lapidot, which might mean she is the wife of a guy named Lapidot, but I think a much simpler and truer reading is she is a woman of Lapidot, right? A woman of, and Lapidot means torches. She is an effervescent figure. Just like Eshet Chayil doesn't mean a woman married to a guy named Chayil. She's a woman of valor. Devorah is a woman of torches, right? So and her sidekick, of course, Barak, also means lightning, but ironically, he's going to refuse to shine. And he's going to say to her, in fact, if we move a little bit ahead, notice what I've underlined here, getting back to the tropes from Rebecca, who said, Elech, this man is going to say, Lo Elech, I won't go. God wants me to go to battle. I don't want to go unless you go with me, woman prophet. And then she finally says, Elech, okay, I'll go with you. I'll hold your hand into battle. And then he agrees to go. So she becomes the intermediary. She's the one who brings the word of God to the man in the story. She's also the one who starts the journey and makes sure that the journey takes place. She is also a judge, right? She's a spiritual leader. She's a military leader, and she's a prophet. Not only that, what is her space? Behi yoshevet tachat tomer devora. Okay, she is not in any indoor tent. She is outside meeting the world, and people are all coming to her to get their judgments, right? She is the judge for the entire nation. Okay. Perhaps more significant than what we are told that Devorah is what we are not told about her. What's missing in this story, in the story that centers on a biblical woman, is that there is no mention whatsoever of children. Does she have children? We're not sure if she's married. Does she have children? If she doesn't, why isn't that the central issue of the story? Is she miserable? Is she experiencing an existential crisis as a result? Nothing. There is not a single mention of it. She's everything other than a mother. Okay, so there's this really extreme role reversal going on here, where the male protagonist in the story is fearful. He's reluctant. He says, "I won't go." She is the leader in every possible way. To take the reversal even further, when the battle is won, we have words that are borrowed from the most bombastic military victory that the Bible has to offer. Those of you who studied Parshat Shavua last week will remember this very well. These words all appear in the story of the Exodus of Egypt. Vayahom, God puts them into a panic. The fleeing and the chariots, and the words lo nishar ad echad, not one remained. All those same words are used in the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And of course, the triumphant song at the end, the song of Moses, Ashira, that same song, Ashira, with that same word is used by Devorah. Right? What we have here is kind of radical rewriting of the biggest salvation story that the Bible has, with a woman who is transposed into the lead role. We've got one more woman to meet, and that is Yael. And here, Yael comes out to greet Sisera. Okay, again, remember, we're in the land of the book of Judges, where everything is topsy-turvy. She comes out to meet Sisera, who has lost the war and is fleeing on foot. And she says to him, "Come on in, come into my tent." Vayasa eleha ha'ohela. And in fact, he turns toward her tent. Okay, so far so matriarchal, and we might even put ourselves in the mindset of this general thinking it'll be safe in there because she's a nice matriarch who's giving me shelter in her tent. right? And she covers him up with a blanket. And I imagine her turning on a little Brahms lullaby. And then he says to her, Hashkini na ma'at mayim. Where have we seen those words before? Give me a little water. Those are words that were spoken by Abraham's servant to Rebekah. That's the way that biblical matriarchs are addressed. I would like a little bit of water. But instead of giving him water, she does this very subversive thing. She opens up a jug of milk. Right? There's this incredibly ironic use of this maternal liquid, milk, right? And she uses this maternal liquid to put him to sleep so that she can kill him. So milk, instead of being this life-giving liquid that a mother gives someone, it is a life-ending liquid that this assassin is using for her purposes. Okay, she opens up the milk, she gives it to him, and she covers him up. He then says to her, Amod petach ohel. Interesting, nobody's ever spoken about this. It's interesting that he switches into the masculine and he tells her to stand at the entrance to the tent. I think he senses that something is a little unusual here. There's something a little patriarchal about this matriarch, but he says to her, now I think I can empower you to be my sentry. Make sure if anybody looks for me, asks, is there anybody in your tent? Say, have you seen him? Say no, or say he went that away, however you want to fill in the gap there. And then Vatikach Yael Eshet Chever et Yitad HaOhel. Okay, here comes the best part. She takes the tent pin and she pounds it into his temple. Birakato. Okay, there are a lot of really amazing words that are used here, really evocative words. First of all, her choice of weapon. How symbolic can you possibly get to take, of all things, the piece of hardware that holds the tent up? What happens when you pull out the tent pin is that the tent comes crashing down. And here's this woman symbolically bringing down a tent and all the pat assumptions that go along with it. Are we going too far if we read into Birakato, into his temple, which seems to play on the name Barak, right? Is she kind of pounding into the notion, the expectation that Barak was going to be the hero of this story? Who's to say? Anyway, this general is dead. Barak then belatedly comes running up, and Yael says to him, it's okay, right? Relax. She says, Lech ve'areka et ha'ish asher ata mevakesh. Go and I will show you the man that you're looking for. He's dead. I've underlined these words, Lech ve'areka, because I found it intriguing, bordering on amusing, that these two words are used in only two places in the Bible. We saw the first one when we started today, when God says to Abraham, Lech lecha el haaretz asher areka, go to the land that I will show you. And here is this biblical woman saying, basically, not only do the women in this story have the communication with God, this woman is now speaking in the voice of God. She's saying to Barak, go where I will show you. Okay, I think the irony is just flying in all directions here. Okay, but we're not done. Now comes Devorah and her triumphant song. And she starts with this. Bimei Shamgar ben Anat, Bimei Yael, Chadelu Arachot. Okay, I'm about to make good on my promise that I made earlier, that these two really resonant words, really significant words, Chadal Orach, paths that had ceased. We first saw these words in Sarah's desperate situation, desperate feeling without children. Her paths have been completely blocked. There's no other way forward in life. And here is Devorah singing about Yael, where paths had ceased. And I think on the surface, this is a song about the Israelite victory, but I've always felt that very close to the surface, this song is an ode to women. She's basically saying, our paths have been cut off, but like the Israelites, we have found arachot al-kalkalot. There are all kinds of circuitous paths that we can find so that we will not be stuck. There are all all kinds of avenues to our fulfillment and to our sense of worth on earth. And so that can be done in all kinds of unexpected ways. She then, this non-mother, has what can only be called the chutzpah to then cry out. She says, Ad shakamti, deliverance ceased. Ad shakamti devora, until I arose. Shakamti aim b'Yisrael. I who arose, I, the mother of Israel. This is not in Israel. This is nothing less than a radical redefinition of motherhood itself, right? Here is this woman who is not, on record, is not a mother, technically, but she mothers her people, right? How? By prophesying, by judging, by leading them to military victory. Those are these circuitous paths, these new paths. And she's saying that, in a sense, is a new kind of mother, and that is a legitimate kind. Yael, too, is a new kind of mother, right? She mothers by giving this maternal liquid only to kill the enemy general, right? And to save her people. She's a new kind of mother who uses her tent as a cover for her bold actions so that she can assassinate this man and save her people, right? Everything is completely turned upside down. And the last little piece of this is that this kind of stinging conclusion of the story in her song, where she says, Deborah, Tivorach minashim Yael, minashim ba'ohel tivorach. Most blessed of women be Yael, right? More blessed than the women of the tent. Those women of the tent who live in the tents, they are surely blessed. All those tent-dwelling women that we encountered in the book of Genesis, lots and lots of blessing. But these women like Yael, they arguably are even more blessed than those. Okay, now I want to move toward conclusion with the obvious question, which is really, isn't this a little over the top, right? Does this male-female equation have to be a zero-sum game where women are enabled at the expense of men, at the expense of tradition, at the expense of motherhood itself, right? One is up, the other is down. Where is our sense of balance? And so here is the way that I look at it, and I'm very fond of this formulation, which is this. I believe that the book of Judges is not interested in parity, it is interested in parody, right? Basically what it's saying is, we saw one extreme of relations between men and women, of women's positions, of women's generalized stereotypical places in life. We saw that in the book of Genesis. And now, as a counterbalance to that, here is the opposite extreme. And what we're looking at, I like to imagine it in the form of a kind of pendulum, where on the one hand, we have these very child-centered matriarchal narratives. And on the opposite side, we've got women's worth that's achieved in every other way. And they're leaders before men and God. They are the only people who are leading. And I think for me, at least, the image of the pendulum was helpful because, first of all, it's always moving. And second of all, I think if I'm right, it spends most of its time not at the extreme edges, but in the full gamut of space in between. And what I think is what's really happening here is that the idea behind these edges and these extremes is that the ultimate aim is in fact parity, right? Somewhere in between all of this, somewhere in the space within. It's basically saying everything and its opposite and everything in between is possible. And what we're aiming at is some parity. Do we have a biblical text that actually presents that parity? And here I really want to move toward conclusion with not a sequel, but a prequel. We saw that little piece in the Akedat Yitzchak, who sent us back to the creation story, and he claimed that there were two incarnations of the original woman, one named Isha and one named Chava. But in truth, he missed one, because the very first biblical woman, and I would argue perhaps her most fundamental identity, and I think even her ideal identity is the very first name that she is given. And here it is. Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. God created this creature called ha'adam in God's image. Zachar u'nekeva bara otam. God created them, male and female. Vayivarech otam Elohim. God blessed them. God is speaking equally, directly to both of them. Both have this pipeline to God. They are equal before God. They are equal with each other. Vayivarech otam Elohim, vayomer lahem Elohim, both of them. Pru urvu, both of you, be fruitful, multiply. Mil'u et haaretz, fill the earth. Kivshuha, conquer it. Do everything that is within your potential to do, and everything is in your potential to do. Redu, have mastery over everything. Basically, what we've got here is a sense that that women have not only 100% equality to man in unlimited capability and potential, they are both 100% equal before God. Neither man nor woman is derivative of the other. We do see that later, but not in this initial creation. Neither is limited in their potential. Neither one is primary or secondary. Both have infinite value. Each is worthy of infinite dignity, parity, I think, in every way. And I would end with this, that I believe that if we get back to the question of what does a woman want, I think that this is the Bible's best response to that. Everything, parity, all of it. Thank you. I am now going to pause for the first time in a very long time and entertain your questions if you have them.
So you can feel free to use the raise hand emoji to indicate that you have a question.
And I need to find out how I see everybody. What do I do? Help.
You'll click on share screen at the bottom. You should be able to end share screen by clicking on that.
Oh, stop share. Got it. Oh,
there we go. And I see that Sandra has a question.
Okay, am I unmuted here?
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So this was amazing. So let me ask a question then. Are you positing then that the third name is Ha'adam? Would the third iteration, the first, really, that's right.
First one, and I want to argue.
One.
Yes,
that's it. So the pre-number one would be, so the number one is presented to us as Isha, number two is presented to us as Chava. But basically you're saying pre-one is actually Ha'adam, and Ha'adam contains both. And that's where the notion of the Midrash comes, where you have a male facing in one direction and a female facing in another.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
yes, and I don't know why this is so often overlooked. Akedat Yitzchak picks up on the fact that there's Isha, Isha is the incarnation of woman that's taken from the side of man, and Chava is after they eat from the fruit, she becomes this mother of all the living, and her role becomes, I think, very severely limited to that. But before any of that happened, we have this, I think, ideal creature. This is the way it's supposed to be. Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure. Who else? Come on, brave souls. How come I don't
Joshua Waxman, if you'd like to ask your question.
Why don't I see everybody? What happened here?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful and mind-blowing in terrific ways. And I was just struck by one of the comparisons that you had made, which was from Shirat Dvorah, about the idea of sort of a mother in Israel, and sort of as this different model of what mother could mean in terms of being in charge of the people. And I'm wondering if you think that resonates with the section in Bamidbar in chapter 11, when Moses complains about the fact that he hasn't birthed this people, he hasn't suckled this people, as a way of sort of disavowing his responsibility, but in the same model, sort of showing that as the way that one could have full charge of the people as this mother figure.
that he could be a mother figure too. Is that what you mean?
Well, he's saying in this case, I'm not, but he's also, by saying that, it seems to me, he's sort of saying, yes, this is a role for women to be sort of the mother of the whole people. And I was just wondering if you think that
I see.
resonates with the idea of what
No,
Dvorah
I
is.
never thought of it. Thank you. Yeah, sure. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
The best thing about teaching, always learning. Thank you.
Okay, Robert, you can ask your question next.
Yes, my question is basically the fact that Yael, with whom Sisera seeks refuge, is listed in the text as a Kenite
Yes.
who was basically, if not a friend of Sisera's ruler, at least neutral. And here, what Yael does, apparently with no particular reason, other than it livens up the narrative, is violate every tenet of Middle Eastern hospitality.
Oh, yeah. Agreed. Was there a question there? I agree. Yes.
So the question is, this whole setup seems to be just somehow out of place. What can we gather from it?
I'm looking at it more from a literary perspective than from a historical perspective. I think maybe that's the difference. Am I right? That I'm looking at her actions as kind of a statement on where are the women in this story of women. It's a very different approach. I don't know if that's answering your question at all. No.
Thank you. Okay.
Also,
Tamara.
if I may ask one other a question, when you refer to the Eshet Chayil, I've heard another explanation that the Eshet Chayil is simply the wife of a Gibor Chayil.
Okay. Yeah, could be. I hope not, but yes. Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you. Yeah, Tamara, would you like to unmute?
Hi, Judy. This is so fun.
Hi.
And I'm here with my daughter, which is even more fun. So awesome. Where do you think Miriam fits into any of this? And I say it also because, and I put in the chat, a friend of mine wrote this article about being a rabbi and being a woman and not having children and kind of where she fits in the landscape of Jewish leadership. And one of the things she points to in there is Miriam as a model. So I'm just curious also, as it relates or maybe does into Dvorah as a prophet, where you think
she's
that
called
fits
a
in.
prophet as well. She's the
Right.
first. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. She also, by the way, says the word Elech is a thread that goes through several women's stories. Rivka, Devorah, Ruth, and half of Miriam, where she says
Right.
Hai. Right. There's the sense that she's definitely part of that whole continuum, somewhere perhaps closer to a middle ground. I don't know.
So she's in the middle of the pendulum, you would say.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Definitely needs more work. Yeah.
Okay. Food for thought.
Okay, the last two questions will be by Yulia and Beverly.
It's
Yulia, would you like to
Hi.
unmute?
so many familiar faces.
Yes. Hi. I'm so sorry. I'm behind the camera, Judy, but it's been wonderful. Even though I've taken this class with you, it's been wonderful to take it again. I have a request. Could you possibly comment on the severe criticism of Dvorah in later rabbinic literature, specifically on Shirat Dvorah? Thank you.
Okay, that's a very big question. I would rather comment on the midrashic somersaults that are used, gymnastics, to try to read this text as something other than what it says. How could she be a leader? How could she be the prophet? And there are all these efforts to try to interpret all of that out of existence because it doesn't match, right? The view of my wonderful Beit Yaakov teachers and most of most of the Orthodox world throughout the generations, right? These are the women that we hold up. But critique, sometimes comes with for all kinds of different reasons. Many of them are sociologically based, and I think very happily what we've gotten back to in recent years, especially here in Israel, is a kind of Bible study that puts its faith in the words on the page. We're not afraid of those words. We don't have to sanitize them in order to understand them. And I think there is a tremendous amount to be gained by just reading carefully and letting the text speak for itself. And to
Thank you
me,
so much.
and to me, this is what these texts are saying.
Thank you.
Okay, Beverly, your question will be the last, and then we'll quickly
Okay.
wrap up and share some announcements.
Hi, Judy. It's wonderful to see you. I saw Judy in Israel 2 weeks ago. I was in her class all semester. So it's a thrill and a joy to see you again. My question is just thinking forward about other biblical women. Past, somebody asked about Miriam, but I was thinking about Ruth and Esther, and even the woman described in Shir HaShiurim, like how the view and how the image of woman continues or doesn't continue.
That is a huge question. By the way, Shir HaShiurim, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that, I think, is a wonderful subversive retelling of the Garden of Eden story, right? Another garden, but there you've got a kind of mutuality between the man and the woman, and it kind of picks up at the tragic ending and turns it around, even to the extent of this is getting far afield, but that terrible statement, El ishech teshukatech, to your husband is your desire, which God says to the woman after they eat from the fruit. In Shir HaShiurim, we have the man, the woman saying about the man, ve'alai teshukato, his passion is for me, kind of reversing some of this, and it goes in both directions. There's a sense that a lot of the imbalance that we saw in the garden at the end of the Garden of Eden story is addressed in Shir HaShiurim. So yes, it goes on. That's the best thing about reading the Bible as a work in constant motion, right? Where the story isn't finished. Keep on looking, keep on finding more resonance into more stories till you just keep on broadening and deepening your understanding of the message.
Best book.
I'm working on something. Talk about that another time. Anyway.
Okay, we have to close. Thank you so much, Judy, for such an interesting shiur. As always, we so appreciate all of the teaching you've done over your 30 years at Pardes and that you continue to do. So thank you. Thank you to all of you who came. I have a couple of quick announcements, and then if anybody wants to stay on just for a couple of minutes to say hi informally, we'll stop the recording and folks can do so if they'd like. So a couple of quick announcements. We have another exciting learning opportunity coming up this week. There's a class called The Great Beyond, Death and the Afterlife, with Pardes North America faculty member Rabbi John Leaner. This will be the first session of a 3-part series, and it begins this Thursday, February 9th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. I'll send out all of those details in a follow-up email after the shiur. Next in the Legacy Learning series is March 14th with Rabbi Aryeh Ben David. What is the most important line of the Haggadah? So starting to do some Passover prep. So stay tuned for more exciting online learning opportunities with Pardes. I'll post that as well in the follow-up email. Thank you again, everybody, for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Jordan.